As tensions continue to rise in the Middle East, a surprising diplomatic development is quietly taking shape behind the scenes. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is reportedly working on a new negotiation framework with Iran at a time when attacks and regional instability are still escalating. Can diplomacy succeed where conflict continues to grow, or is this just another chapter in a long and complicated standoff? Today, we break down what's happening, why it matters, and what it could mean for the future of global security. Recent reports suggest that Donald Trump and his policy advisors are actively shaping a renewed negotiation strategy aimed at addressing tensions with Iran. This comes amid ongoing hostilities in the Middle East, including proxy conflicts, targeted strikes, and rising military activity across the region. The proposed framework appears to focus on several key areas: nuclear restrictions, regional de-escalation, sanctions relief, and security guarantees. According to sources close to the discussions, the goal is to create a structured pathway that could bring Iran back into compliance with international nuclear expectations, while also addressing broader geopolitical concerns. However, what makes this development particularly complex is the timing. Even as diplomatic ideas are being explored, violence on the ground has not subsided. Armed groups aligned with Iran continue to be involved in conflicts across multiple countries, while retaliatory actions from opposing forces keep the situation volatile. Trump's approach, as described by analysts, differs from previous diplomatic efforts. It reportedly emphasizes stricter enforcement mechanisms, clearer timelines, and a more transactional style of negotiation. Instead of relying heavily on multinational agreements, this framework may prioritize direct leverage, economic pressure, and bilateral understandings. At the same time, there are questions about the practicality of implementing such a framework, especially given the current geopolitical climate. Trust between Iran and the United States remains extremely low, and both sides have historically been skeptical of each other's intentions. To understand the significance of this development, it's important to look at the history of U.S.-Iran relations. The relationship between the two countries has been tense for decades, dating back to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent hostage crisis. In more recent history, one of the most significant milestones was the 2015 nuclear agreement, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. This deal, negotiated between Iran and several world powers, aimed to limit Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. However, in 2018, during his presidency, Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement, calling it insufficient and flawed. He argued that it did not adequately address Iran's missile program or its involvement in regional conflicts. Following the withdrawal, the U.S. imposed a series of strict economic sanctions on Iran under what was called a maximum pressure campaign. In response, Iran gradually reduced its compliance with a nuclear deal, increasing uranium enrichment levels and limiting access to international inspectors. This led to growing concerns among global powers about the potential for nuclear escalation. Since then, multiple attempts have been made to revive or renegotiate the agreement, but progress has been slow and inconsistent. Diplomatic talks have often been interrupted by political changes, mutual distrust, and ongoing regional conflicts. Meanwhile, the Middle East has remained a hotspot for geopolitical tensions. Conflicts involving Iran-backed groups in countries like Syria, Iraq, and Yemen have continued to influence the broader security landscape. These dynamics make any negotiation effort significantly more challenging. The emergence of a new negotiation framework at this stage raises several important questions. First, is diplomacy still a viable path forward given the current level of conflict? And second, what distinguishes this proposed approach from previous efforts? One key aspect is the emphasis on leverage. Trump's previous strategy relied heavily on economic sanctions to pressure Iran into negotiations. While this approach did have an impact on Iran's economy, critics argue that it also hardened Iran's stance and reduced the likelihood of compromise. The new framework appears to build on this idea, but may attempt to combine pressure with incentives more effectively. For example, phased sanctions relief could be tied directly to verifiable actions by Iran, creating a step-by-step process rather than a single comprehensive agreement. Another important factor is regional security. Any successful negotiation with Iran would likely need to address not only nuclear issues but also Iran's role in regional conflicts. This includes its relationships with various armed groups and its influence in neighboring countries. From a geopolitical perspective, the involvement or lack thereof of other global powers will also be crucial. Countries such as China, Russia, and members of the European Union have played significant roles in previous negotiations. A framework that excludes or minimizes their participation could face challenges in gaining international support. Additionally, domestic politics in both the United States and Iran could influence the outcome. In the U.S., political divisions often shape foreign policy decisions, while in Iran, internal dynamics between different factions can impact the country's willingness to engage in negotiations. There is also the question of timing. With ongoing attacks and rising tensions, initiating a diplomatic process becomes more complicated. On one hand, conflict can create urgency for negotiations. On the other hand, it can also reduce trust and increase the risk of miscalculation. For the global community, the stakes are high. A successful agreement could reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation, stabilize the region, and improve economic conditions. Conversely, a failure could lead to further escalation, potentially involving multiple countries and creating wider instability. As the situation continues to evolve, one thing is clear: the balance between diplomacy and conflict remains fragile. The reported efforts to build a new negotiation framework with Iran highlight both the challenges and the possibilities of international diplomacy in a highly complex environment. Whether this approach leads to meaningful progress or becomes another missed opportunity will depend on multiple factors: trust, timing, political will, and the ability to navigate deep-rooted tensions. For viewers and global observers alike, staying informed is more important than ever. These developments don't just affect one region, they have implications for global security, energy markets, and international relations as a whole. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to stay connected for more in-depth analysis and updates on major global events. Understanding the world around us is the first step toward making sense of where it's headed.